You think I don't see it? They said the room would be quiet. It wasn't. It was the kind of noise you get when truth is about to walk in uninvited. Reporters shifting in their seats. Aides pretending not to watch. Cameras blinking, catching everything and nothing at once. Federal housing reform. That was the agenda. But for many sitting there, it wasn't about roofs or rent. It was about territory. Who gets to speak? Who gets to matter? And Zohran Mamdani, he knew exactly what kind of room he just stepped into. Across from him sat Senator JD Vance. Neat haircut, loosened tie, like it had been staged just enough to say, "I'm relatable." He leaned back like he had nothing to prove. But his eyes were locked, waiting, planning, ready to paint the day in talking points. Zoran had seen that look before. He didn't flinch. He came with numbers, yes, but more importantly, with names, with stories, with the weight of lives that never got rooms like this. He flew in from Queens the night before, skipped the dinner, spent hours reviewing eviction data until the text blurred. But nothing blurred now. He adjusted the mic, flipped one page in his folder, didn't speak, just waited. Then it came. Vance raised his hand, calm like a man setting a trap. "Mr. Mamdani," he said smoothly, "you've been vocal about expanding federal funding for housing in cities like yours. But how do you justify that when these same cities are plagued with crime, homelessness, mismanagement, all under your party's leadership? Why should federal money go to failure?" There it was, polished, rehearsed, brutal in its simplicity. The message was clear. Your cities are broken, your people are to blame, and the rest of us shouldn't have to pay for it. A few heads turned, a few pens stopped moving. JD Vance leaned back again like he'd scored a point. Zoran didn't blink. He reached for his water, took a single sip, and then looked up. "You think I don't see it?" That's how he began. "I represent neighborhoods where people work 2 jobs and still fall short on rent, where families sleep 4 to a room, not because they're lazy, but because every damn policy for the last 40 years told them they didn't count." The room quieted. "You say mismanagement. I say abandonment." He let that hang, not like a punchline, like a memory. "You want to talk about cities? Let's talk. But you better be ready to talk about who drained them dry. Who sent banks but not schools? Who gave them highways but took away homes? And when they ask for help, you show up calling them failures." Across the internet, a single clip began to spread. No background music, just that one line. "You think I don't see it?" The energy in the room shifted because this wasn't about partisanship anymore. It was about who gets seen. It was about people like Valerie, a woman from Bedford-Stuyvesant who'd spent 14 months on a waiting list for housing, raising her grandchild in a borrowed room with peeling paint and a mold-covered ceiling. People like Malcolm, a teenager doing homework by flashlight in the back of a car parked under an overpass in East Harlem. But Zoran wasn't done yet. He leaned in, calm, measured, voice steady. "Senator," he said, eyes locked on JD Vance, "if you want to talk about outcomes, then let's talk about how Ross County, Ohio, has the highest opioid overdose rate in your state. Let's talk about families in Pikeville using space heaters in winter because their trailers don't have insulation. Let's talk about the rural poor who've been screaming into the dark for decades." He flipped a page, and then softly, "You don't get to call my people broken while ignoring your own backyard." At that moment, the silence in the hearing room didn't feel empty. It felt like reckoning. JD Vance let out a short breath. Not a sigh, not quite, but enough to show he'd felt the hit. He straightened in his chair, forced a half smile. "Well, Representative Mamdani," he said, voice smooth but tighter now, "you mentioned poverty in rural counties. But here's the difference. We take responsibility. We don't blame the past. We fix things. Isn't it time urban leaders stop making excuses?" The sentence dropped like a stone, and for a split second, Zohran Mamdani just stared at him. Calm, still. Then he nodded once, like a man cracking open a door to something he didn't want to show. "Responsibility," he repeated quietly. He opened his binder again. This time he pulled out a photo. A house in Kentucky, peeling paint, sagging porch, two broken windows boarded with scrap wood. He slid it gently across the table toward the cameras. "This is Maysville," he said, "a town of about 9,000. That home belongs to a woman named Janice. She's 62. Her heater broke 2 winters ago. She uses the oven for heat. No insulation. Leaks in the roof." He looked up at Vance. "You know what she told a local paper last month? She said, 'They always talk about the cities on TV. Nobody ever asks about us.'" There was no anger in his voice, only grief. "You want to talk responsibility? Let's talk about how that woman applied for heating assistance 3 times and got denied every time. Let's talk about how the federal funding you voted against would have repaired her roof, maybe even saved her from the pneumonia that nearly killed her." He leaned forward, and his voice dropped just enough to make everyone lean in too. "We are not enemies, Senator. Not her and me, not Bed-Stuy and Maysville, not Harlem and Appalachia." He paused. "But when you use rooms like this to pit us against each other, city versus country, black versus white, us versus them, that's what you create." The silence was heavier now. People weren't blinking. They were listening. "I'm not here to perform," he said. "I'm here because someone has to say it. Poverty is not a moral failure. It's not a crime to be poor. But in this country, it gets treated like one, depending on your zip code and the color of your skin." From the back of the room, a staffer whispered something to another. On Twitter, a live thread caught fire. The post read, "Zohran Mamdani didn't show up with sound bites. He showed up with receipts." But Zohran wasn't reading Twitter. He was remembering. He flipped another page. "Here's a federal report from 2023, he said. "States with the highest rates of housing insecurity? Not New York, not California, Kentucky, Mississippi, West Virginia, Arkansas. Overwhelmingly rural, overwhelmingly white." He turned back to Vance. "So you don't get to say this is about failed cities. It's about failed priorities." And then came the moment. He closed the binder. The room tensed, because they knew whatever came next wasn't printed on paper. "I don't usually say this in hearings," Zohran began, hands folded, "because the second you get personal, people try to twist it. But today, I'm going to tell you something." He paused, took a breath. "I was 13 when we lost our apartment." Just like that, the room stopped breathing. "My mother cleaned houses. My father was a mechanic until he got injured. One day we came home from school and the locks were changed. Our stuff was in the hallway, like trash. My little sister thought we were moving." Someone in the room lowered their eyes. "We spent 3 weeks sleeping in the back of my uncle's pickup truck. I did my homework on the dashboard light, and you know what I remember most? The silence. Nobody talked about it. Not the teachers, not the neighbors. Like poverty had to stay quiet, or it would shame the room." He looked up. "That's why I'm here." His voice never cracked, but the pain was right there, plain, steady, honest. "Because people like Janice in Maysville and my mom in Queens, they're not failures, they're survivors. And I'm tired of this government acting like they're invisible." Across the internet, another clip was already climbing. No background track, no edits, just Zohran's voice steady as steel. Senator JD Vance shifted in his seat. He wasn't rattled, not visibly, but there was a stillness in his hands now. The kind that comes when someone realizes the old script won't work anymore. He leaned into the mic, trying to reclaim the moment. "With all due respect," he said, voice measured, "we can't solve housing insecurity with emotion. We need practical solutions, not speeches about pickup trucks and broken heaters." The words were calm, but they cut, not because they were clever, but because they missed the point. Zohran didn't blink. He leaned forward. "Let me ask you something, Senator," he said quietly. "When a working-class white family in rural Ohio loses their home, people call it a tragedy. When a black family in the Bronx loses theirs, it's a statistic. Why is that?" No one answered. He didn't expect them to. "That's not policy. That's bias," he said. And it was like the room had tilted, just slightly, towards something raw and unavoidable. "You say we can't fix housing with emotion. But I've read your speeches. When rural folks in your state struggle with drugs or job loss, You call it a crisis. You call it the death of the American dream. But when cities ask for help, you say it's their fault. He paused. That's not fairness. That's a double standard. He turned to the chairwoman for a brief second, then looked back at Vance. I read your voting record last night. You voted no on the Rural Housing Stability Assistance Program. That bill would have helped homeless veterans in your counties, rehabbed low-income units, and kept displaced families from sleeping in their cars. The words hung there like a storm cloud. You voted no. The silence was deafening. You say government can't solve everything? Fine. But how do you justify doing nothing? How do you walk into a room like this, shame the poor, and then walk out like it's not your job to help them? Vance looked down. Not long, just a flick of the eyes. But it was enough. Enough to show that the weight of truth was starting to press. Zohran saw it, but he didn't stop. He reached into his folder again and pulled out a printed email, enlarged, highlighted. This is from a man named Travis in Hazard, Kentucky, he said. He wrote to your office last year asking for help after he and his 2 sons were evicted. His wife had just passed away. He couldn't keep up with the payments. He was begging for help with transitional housing. He slid the email forward so it faced Vance. Your office never responded. You could have heard a paperclip drop. I spoke to Travis last month, Zohran continued, his voice softer now. He said something I haven't been able to shake. He looked at Vance, his eyes steady. He said, I didn't think people in D.C. would ever care what happened to people like me. That line didn't hit the air like politics. It hit like confession. He didn't say Democrats or Republicans. He didn't ask about your war party. He asked if anyone still gave a damn. Zohran leaned back, hands folded now. And I'm asking you, Senator, what do you want me to tell him? The room wasn't just listening anymore. It was absorbing. Because it wasn't about Travis or Janice or Zohran's mother. It was about the uncomfortable truth underneath all of it, that this country treats suffering like it has a color. And somehow some lives get compassion, and others just get blamed. Do you think pain should be political? Or is it time we start treating every family like they matter, no matter where they live? Drop a comment below and let us know what you think. If this story resonates with you, don't just scroll, subscribe, because more voices deserve to be heard. People don't live in spreadsheets. Zohran didn't speak for a few seconds. He let the silence breathe. Not for drama, but because he knew the people he was speaking for never got this kind of room, never got this kind of moment. He opened his folder one last time. No photos this time, just data. Let's talk numbers since that's what people trust, he said calmly but firmly. The median rent in my district is $2,550. The average full-time worker at minimum wage brings home about $2,100 a month. That's before taxes. That's before groceries. That's before childcare. He looked around. Do the math. No one moved. Let me be clear. These aren't people living off the system. These are people working night shifts at nursing homes, stocking shelves at big box stores, delivering food to our front doors. He tapped the binder with his fingers. But when they fall behind on rent, when they're evicted, they don't get a headline. They don't get a bailout. They get told to try harder. His voice didn't rise, but it cut sharper now. You say we need to fix things without emotion, he said, glancing again towards Senator Vance. But what do you think drives a family to survive in a car for 6 months and still get their kids to school? What do you think holds a single mother together when she's denied housing because her credit score took a hit after a medical bill? He leaned in. It's not spreadsheets. It's not metrics. It's love. It's fear. It's the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone in this town still sees them. A few people near the back shifted in their seats. The room wasn't tense anymore. It was heavy. Zohran folded the binder closed. Look, I know it's easy to sit here and talk about fiscal responsibility and wasteful spending. I've heard it all. But here's the truth. You can balance a budget by starving the poor. That doesn't make you a leader. It just makes you cruel. The words landed like thunder. He looked directly into the cameras now. I went to a high school that lost its accreditation twice. We had mold on the ceiling and textbooks from the 90s. When I asked why, I was told, we're reviewing funding in 2 years. He exhaled. 2 years is a lifetime when you're 17 and already behind. There was no rebuttal, not from Vance, not from anyone, because it didn't feel like politics anymore. It felt like someone finally naming what everyone else tries to hide. And by the way, Zohran added, this isn't just about the cities. This is about trailer parks in West Virginia, rusting towns in Pennsylvania, broken homes in Tennessee. These families don't want pity. They want policy. They want respect. He sat back for a moment, eyes scanning the room. And if we can't give them that, then what are we doing here? What if it had been me? The chairwoman didn't interrupt. No one did, because by now everyone in that room, even the ones pretending to check their notes, understood something rare was happening. Zohran wasn't just debating. He was remembering. He shifted in his chair, folded his hands slowly in front of the mic. There's something I don't usually talk about, he said, because when you make it personal in this town, they call it weakness. But I'm going to tell you anyway. A pause, not for effect, for strength. I once defended a woman who had been arrested for trespassing, he said. She was found sleeping in an abandoned apartment building with her 2 kids. No water, no heat, no door that locked. He looked straight ahead. She cleaned offices at night, dropped her kids off at school every morning, worked double shifts, and she was still called a criminal because, technically, she didn't have a legal address. His voice was soft now, the kind of soft that forces people to stop and lean in. She didn't ask for pity. She asked for somewhere to keep her kids safe. He paused again, just long enough to feel the lump rise in his throat. I remember sitting across from her and thinking, if just one thing in my life had gone differently, one accident, one job loss, one missed paycheck, that could have been me. Same exhaustion in her eyes, same fire. He looked over at Senator Vance. Have you ever asked yourself that, Senator? What if it had been me? What if it had been your daughter? The silence that followed wasn't respectful. It was stunned. This isn't theoretical, Zohran said, his voice steady now. We have Americans sleeping in their cars tonight, not because they're lazy, but because the rent went up already and their wages didn't move a dime. He opened his binder again, not to read, but to show a map. This is a heat map of evictions filed last year, he said. Red zones are where it's worst. You'll see Louisville, Baltimore, Detroit, but you'll also see Harlan County, Kentucky, and rural Ohio, and small towns in Texas. He held the map steady. We are so obsessed with blaming the place, the city, the zip code, the community, that we forget the truth. Poverty is not a location. It's a condition, and it is spreading. A rustle moved through the room. One of the younger aides in the back wiped her eyes without drawing attention. And look, Zohran added, more gently now, I don't hate rural America. I've driven through your counties, Senator. I've seen empty shelves in gas stations, and I've watched kids walk half a mile on a dirt road to catch a school bus. You think I don't recognize that pain? He shook his head slowly. That's where we keep messing up, acting like pain has a side, like suffering is a political party. He glanced again toward the cameras. Let me tell you something my mother told me after we were evicted. She said, don't let them shame you for what you had to survive. He held that for a moment. I carry that every day because when politicians turn poverty into a punchline, I hear her voice, and I remember what it felt like to sleep on a borrowed couch, wondering if anyone out there actually cared. Have you ever asked yourself, what if it had been me? Let us know in the comments. Your story matters more than you know. Subscribe and like this video if you believe survival should never be a source of shame. Let's speak for the ones still waiting to be seen. Zohran sat still, then asked softly, why do we split pain by zip code? He turned to JD Vance. A white man in rural Ohio loses his job. It's a tragedy. A black woman in Brooklyn can't pay rent. It's her fault. Why? No one answered. We pity one, we punish the other, he said. That's not policy. That's bias. He pulled out a map. Red zones lit up across cities and rural towns alike. This isn't about failed cities, it's about failed priorities. He shared Letitia's story, 68, evicted after one missed rent payment, now sleeping in a church basement. She worked her whole life. Doesn't she matter too? Zoran's voice stayed low, but no one moved. I've been to your towns, Senator. I've seen the hunger, the cold, and it doesn't look that different from where I'm from. He looked into the cameras. Stop pretending we're different. If poor people ever realize they're fighting the same fight, the whole game would fall apart. The clip of Zohran's speech went viral. Millions watched him say, "We pity one, we punish the other." But he wasn't chasing views. 2 days later, he sat in a church basement in Louisville, folding chairs, no cameras, just folks asking about rent, mold, and hope. Near the end, an older man asked, "Do they even listen to you up there?" Zohran paused, looked around. "Not always," he said, "but I don't speak to make them comfortable. I speak so you don't feel invisible." That was the real win, not the retweets, not the headlines. The win was telling someone who's always been ignored, you matter. Because politics isn't just about bills, it's about memory, who gets seen, who gets heard. And when Zohran spoke of his eviction, of Letitia, of forgotten lives, it wasn't for applause, it was testimony. The truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just needs to be said.